Okay. So, as I said, from 2015 to 2020, he was at the bioinformatics unit at the Institut Pasteur in Paris. And starting 2020, he's now at the Natural History Museum in Paris in the Botanical Garden, if I understood that well. Olivier has a special connection to Crete, so he's been teaching at our summer school that we have been organizing at the Hellenic Institute or Hellenic Center of Marine Research since 2010, every 2 years. So he's been to Crete already 4 times before. And it's also great to see some former students of the summer school that have now turned into researchers in the audience. Okay, so Olivier, thank you so much for coming and joining us. And the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Alexei, for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for attending the talk. So I assume that people either get the CV, they hear me, or they can ask questions, or yeah. Okay, thank you. So my talk today will be about machine learning methods for evolutionary biology. So most of the time I am doing hard genetics, but recently I started doing again machine learning. I will tell you what we have done with drug resistance mutation in HIV and the estimation of phylogenetic parameters. Basically, I will tell 2 stories about machine learning for evolutionary biology. So when I am teaching, I'm used to show this slide to summarize what I am, who I am and what I am doing. I am designing algorithms to infer trees like BioNG, FastME, FIMER. I have done statistical modeling for amino acid substitutions like the LG matrix, branch testing to have support for the branch in the phylogeny, and with 2 methods, one which is local, which is called ANRT, A means approximate, and a new version of the bootstrap called the transfer bootstrap intended to very large data sets. I am working on ancestral reconstruction and inferences, for example, dating, phylogeography, phylogenetics, etc. And my background is in maths and computer science, and here you have a cover of a book that I published in 2005. Possibly during my talk, you will see this inclination toward mathematics. So, and when I moved to Pasteur, and even before, at very first I was a theoretician, working on theorems and algorithms and kind of things. But about 10 or 15 years ago, I decided to put part of my energy and activities in pathogens and epidemiology. I have been working on Plasmodium falciparum, which is the main causative agent of malaria, the history of HIV subtypes and recombinant forms. I have been working on the 10 genes of HIV. It's an interesting story because if you look at Wikipedia, we see only 9 genes, but it has been suggested by the end of the 90s that there could be 10 genes, and we have confirmed the existence of that gene using evolutionary methods. Drug resistance mutation in HIV, I will discuss this more, and other pathogens and viruses. But in '97, I published my first paper in Hard Genetics, which was about BioNG. And this book, I edited this book, and this was pretty much my last writing about machine learning, at least in terms of theory. I was working on the Vatnik-Charbonenko dimension, possibly you hear about that, which is beautiful but purely mathematical. So the first story is about drug resistance mutation in HIV. This has been published 1 year ago in PLOS Computational Biology, and you already have the take-home message. First, from a machine learning perspective, this was disappointing. We were disappointed, at least. And we understand why. And but in terms of HIV and epidemiology and the treatment of HIV, the results, in fact, were very interesting and very positive and country. So how it works? People get infected with HIV. HIV is detected. There is a treatment and drugs. And under the treatment pressure, mutations are selected that give resistance to drugs. And it can happen relatively fast in a few years, hopefully not for everyone. And then the resistance can be transmitted. And they are not transmitted to people who are treated, but they are transmitted to what we call naive or inexperienced people, people that are not yet treated. And the standard assumption is that these mutations correspond to single amino acid mutations. It's a complex landscape of mutations. And the list of mutations, there is a list of mutations that is updated every year, and they are confirmed experimentally. We know a lot about these mutations. And obviously, if someone has resistant mutations, this limits the treatment options. But hopefully, in naive patients, this mutation tends to be reverted, meaning that we go back to the wild type. And again, it can occur relatively. So if you have any questions, just tell me. And the standard approach to discover resistant mutation is the following. We have two types of sequences. The sequences that belong to naive patients and the sequences that belong to treated patients. And we expect more resistant mutation in the treated sequences than in the naive sequences. But this is not perfect because of the transmission of drug-resistant mutation, meaning that we have some occurrence of drug-resistant mutation even among the naive patients. And so the standard approach is very simple. You have these two big bags of sequences, and we test all mutations in datasets for association with treatment. And we use a very standard test, which is the Fisher exact test. And we have to correct for p-values because we test a lot of mutations. And we keep the significantly associated mutations. So it's a very few points that we go through. And the problem with that is that we have many mutations, many possible drug-resistant mutations, many mutations, which means many tests. And because we have so many tests, we have a low statistical power. It's difficult to detect drug-resistant mutations this way. And it's just impossible to test whether an association of two mutations give resistance, because testing all pairs of mutations like the statistical power equals 0. Yeah.
How many sequences do you have?
It's a good question. I will show that. Here we have two data sets, one with 55,000 sequences and another with 4,000 sequences.
So probably you would have 5 million sequences, then even small differences.
We don't have 5 million.
But at some point in the future, you might have, right? So even a small difference.
You know, HIV is very special because the data are confidential in some sense. They are not shared. And here we use data coming from the UK. And as you know, UK has a test to sequence pathogens and to assemble a clean database. But for example, from France, we do not have 50,000 sequences.
And what correction do you apply?
Sorry?
What kind of correction? FDR, bonferroni?
We use all bonferroni, very standard. Okay, this is the standard approach. And then we try another one based on machine learning. And we have the same sequences, same, yeah. And we have about 55,000 sequences. We know the treatment status, meaning that we know if the sequences belong to treated people or naive people. We have features in the machine learning, meaning say each mutation corresponds to a binary feature. The mutation is there, but it is not there in the sequence. And we know the classification target, which is to predict the treatment status. Okay, meaning that we'll try to learn the difference between the two bags of sequences and to be able to predict if it's live sequences or affected sequences. And if we can do that, this means that we have been able to discover resistance mutation. And obviously, we have to choose the right methods to discriminate between this population of sequences. And we use random forest, logistic regression, and naive Bayes. All these methods are very similar. But if you think to random forest, with random forest, you are able to detect an association of mutations that you could detect that gives resistance to drugs. And with logistic regression, you should be able to detect a kind of landscape where we have weights for each mutation, and if you have a sufficient number of mutations with high weights, then we have resistance. This is a slightly different schema, and we use naive Bayes, which is a kind of compromise between the two approaches. The pros is that these methods are very easy to train, and above all, they are very easy to interpret, meaning that when you are able to discriminate between the two populations of sequences, you can extract the important features, and these important features they will correspond to the representation. And this is why we didn't use deep learning, for example, which is a kind of black box. It's very difficult to understand where the decision comes from.
Olivier?
Yeah.
So the target is the kind of the bug, if it is a naive sequence, what is a treated sequence?
What is the sequence that correspond to patients that are already treated?
What is the target of the machine learning? What is the class, the two classes?
There are two classes, naive sequences versus treated sequences.
So you have a sequence of mutations and you want to predict if they come from a naive sequence or from a
treated sequence.
Which is a bit different than the previous question, right? With the
this is a bit different. The goal was to check that we are able
to predict the
class. Because if we are able, this means that we have been able to detect some resistance mechanism.
So, but you don't predict if a mutation is drug resistant or not.
No.
It's a different question, right?
No, this is a different question, but this is the data that we have.
Yes, okay.
There are other types of data with this area, but the amount of data where we know the resistance status of the sequence. We have 50,000 sequences or even more, but for the sequences that are experimentally checked and validated, we have a few thousand. Yeah. Okay. So about the data sets, we have data set from the UK with 55,000 sequences, treatment status, and in the data set we have two subtypes, subtype B and subtype C. And we have a data set from Africa that we already analyzed before in 2016 with about 4,000 sequences with treatment status, and sequences are highly diverse because we have 10 subtypes and recombinant forms, circulating recombinant forms, etc. And the African dataset is much easier to classify because we have more resistance, meaning that there are more sequences that are resistant, and we have less transmission to naive patients, meaning that there is a much better separation between the two sets of the sequences. And the problem when doing that is that the sequences they are not independent. You know, in machine learning, you always assume that the samples correspond to independent realization of the background distribution, but here is clearly not the case. When you take two sequences that are closely related in the phylogeny, they are possibly identical, or they are highly dependent. And meaning that we accounted that by clearly separating the training and the testing sets, meaning that we have trained the learners of subtype B but we tested it on subtype C and African data. Same with subtype C to train the learners that testing on B and Africa. And we trained on B and C, and we tested on Africa. And we were only confident in the results that we have with the testing sets, but not on the training. And among the difficulties that there is a clear class imbalance, meaning that we have only about 25% of treated sequences, 75 of naive sequences, and most drug-resistant mutations are very rare, with a frequency below 1%, meaning that we know that it will not be so easy to discover this. So, assuming that we have a complete data set, we have all the sequences and all the possible mutations, and the goal is to separate the treated and the naive sequences, we know that the task will be relatively easy, because we know a lot of DRMs, and meaning that it will be easy to separate these two sets. And we first applied the learners to this kind of data, but just to check that they were working properly. But then we removed the signal, the known signal, meaning that we remove all the columns corresponding to known resistance mutations. And then the question was, are we still able to distinguish the naive and the treated sequences? Because everything that is known was removed. Okay, I will give you the answer very quickly. And then we were even more drastic. We not only removed the columns corresponding to known signal, but we also remove the sequences that have at least one resistant mutation, meaning that sequences that are resistant, leaving just the sequences that have no resistant mutation, and and divided in two bags, naive and treated sequences. Okay, and here are the results. So I have to explain this a bit. In blue here, this means that all the features are kept in the full data set. In orange, we have removed what is known. And in green, we have not only removed what is known, that is the resistance mutation, but also all the sequences having at least one resistance mutation. And here you have the different methods. And here you have the balance accuracy, the higher the better. And if you look at the plain bars, this corresponds to learning with B and C and testing on the African sequence. And the dash bar corresponds to the cross validation between B and C and C and D. And NB is naive Bayes, logistic regression, random forest, and FC is a very simple classifier where we first extracted the DRM using the procedure explained with the exact Fisher test, and the sequence was classified as treated or resistant, but at least one of these mutations. Okay. And we were very disappointed because all the methods are the same, exactly the same. And the very naive approach works well, in fact. And but we did not start with that. At some point, we said, okay, we should check. And when we check and we observe that, we were very disappointed. Because we had the feeling, okay, what we have done is just few tests. But we realized that this is relatively, in fact, these are good results from China. First, the accuracy with complete signal, that is with known DRMs, is high. If you look at this bar, it corresponds to classifying the African sequences. We are close to 90%. We know that the data are perfect. We have a very good signal. And we are able to recover the known DRMs, which was reassuring. When we removed the known DRMs, there was still a signal. This corresponds to the orange bars. This one is close to 60%, meaning that there is a signal, meaning that there is an additional signal that is not known. Meaning that we should be able to detect new mutation or new mutational mechanisms. But when we remove both the known DRMs and the sequences harboring at least when they run. This corresponds to this green part, and 0.5 corresponds to random prediction, meaning that there was no more signal. And why this is good news? This is good news because this means that the sequences that we have been able to detect there, they don't confer the resistance themselves. They are auxiliary mutations or compensatory mutations. And yeah. And the second point is that there is no complex epistasis process like having a dozen of sequences which do not have any meaning by themselves, but when combined, they make it possible to distinguish the two classes of sequences. And my understanding of that is that, in fact, it's very rational from an evolutionary point of view, which is that the mutations that emerge sequentially, meaning that you first get the mutations that confer resistance directly by itself alone. And when this is done, you have more mutation, and this is done sequentially. And the confirmation of that is that all the mutations have a genetic barrier of 1, meaning that a single mutation as the DNA label is sufficient to switch from the one amino acid to another. Meaning these mutations are easily obtained in the process of evolution. And why this is, well, to summarize, why this is good news, this is because all mutations directly confirm resistance they are known, meaning that what we get is the auxiliary and compensatory mutations. And for example, when analyzing the output of the method, we found that mutation, which is clearly associated to resistance, which was not known before. This means that an L has been turned into an R on reference position 2008 of 2020 of the reverse transcriptase. This is what this means. And when you look at this mutation, it is here. And here you have the active site, and here in yellow you have the binding pocket for the drugs. And this clearly makes sense. So this mutation, it is very close to the active site within the binding pocket. I don't know if you can read that, but for example, these mutations here, it is 18 times more frequent in among the treated patients than among the naive patients, meaning that there is a very clear difference in terms of frequency for that mutation. And the genetic barrier is 1, and etc.
Olivier, could you explain the genetic barrier concept?
The genetic barrier, this is a simple concept. You have 2 amino acids. You count the minimum number of DNA changes that you need to
DNA changes to go from one to the other.
Switch from one to the other. This can be in first, second, and third codon position. I did not check that one, but I'm sure this is not on the third codon position because leucine L and R, they are quite different.
And you find genetic barrier 1 most of the time, right? So you have a non-synonymous changes in principle.
Yeah, we have non-synonymous changes with a single mutation at the DNA level. And all the mutations that we found had a genetic barrier of 1. But this was not imposed by the method. This is an argument.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the Blossom score, for example, for R versus R is -2, meaning that these 2 amino acids, they are truly different. They are very different. This explains why this makes a difference in terms of resistance. Okay. So,
Olivier, do you see if this amino acid changes properties of the hydrophobicity or whatever?
Yeah, for example, R is mostly hydrophobic and R is mostly hydrophilic and positively charged, etc. They are very different. These 2 amino acids are. So, as I said, this was disappointing from a machine learning perspective, but informative and positive regarding HIV, because we know that we have discovered pretty much all the possible resistance mutations. And in fact, there is a literature on that that I did not discuss during the talk, but you could have a look into that paper published in 2020, where the data and the goal was different. In this data, we had sequences with experimental measurement about the resistance value of the sequence, which is completely different to what we have. And they have about 2,000 or 4,000 sequences. And the goal was to make a black box to help predicting the best treatment for given patients. And they use deep learning techniques, and they show us that the convolutional neural network are performing best, and that the output is more accurate than the current algorithms that are used to predict treatments. You have questions on that? I will move to something very different.
Okay. So, okay, I think I have an explanation why the algorithm fails when you remove the columns. When you remove the DRMs, the algorithm, the accuracy goes down quite a lot, like the orange lines.
Yeah.
And probably the reason is that, but it doesn't go below the red line.
But this is still significant. I am not sure with that, but
and probably this is related to the hitchhiking effect, because some neutral variants that are not drug resistant are linked, physically linked to the DRM. So if you remove it, there is still signal because these are transferred together to a new infection.
Yeah, I understand what you say. Difficult to.
However, the problem, why the accuracy is not so high, is not higher, it's because HIV is known to have a very high mutation rate. So in principle, this means that the DRMs are recursive. They are happening all the time. Different origin of mutation between patients.
So I'm sure I will answer your point, but.
So if you have two patients and they have the same DRM, probably these are independent events.
Sure.
It's not via common ancestor. Because if it would be via common ancestor, then the linked variants would be exactly the same. So you would have more signal from the linked mutation, from the orange line, if this would be by a common ancestor. And now you don't have it.
You have to take care because here this corresponds to the test set. For example, the African guy, and with machine learning machinery trained using people from the UK. And yeah, so I'm not sure that what you say are right. But where we are right, for sure, is that this DRM emerged a number of times, hundreds of times, for example, in the UK datasets, independently. The very same DRM, they emerge independently. Yeah. So maybe, but it is said, an interesting number is the following. It is said that every possible mutation in the genome of HIV, which is 10,000 long, is tested every day.
Wow.
Wow. The meaning that it's very easy for the virus to escape the treatment. This is why we use it. Treatment.
Actually, this method exactly in another dataset would give much better results. If you don't have these all the time new mutations.
Yeah.
I'm sure about it.
Yeah.
How many DRMs is the total that you had in your?
It's about 100.
100. And how many did you deduct for the first?
Did we find the 100 ones? Or?
So the first column, right, is performed with 100 DRMs, right?
They are there. They are not being removed.
And the second one, how many did you remove?
We remove all of them. We remove all non-DRMs. But there is still a signal, meaning that there are still mutations that are associated to resistance that are not listed in the official.
All right. How many is the sum of your DRMs and mutations? have?
In terms of number?
Yeah.
So the number of non-adherents is about 100,
Yeah.
rough number. And in the paper, we propose 6 new associated resistant mutations that we analyze in detail, like the one I showed. But it's very difficult to put a threshold.
I mean, in your array, you had samples and
The question about the size of the array?
yes, exactly.
Okay, the number of lines when you learn from the UK dataset is 55,000.
Yeah.
And the number of columns, this is the number I showed before, this is 1,700.
1,700, and we remove the 100.
Yeah, but
And if you do, if you remove random 100, or is this already done in the?
if we remove just part of them, or
No, if you remove not the known 100 DRMs, if you do some kind of Monte Carlo, or is it already in this deep forest and other?
You mean if we remove the 100 columns?
Randomly. If you do this simulation.
Well, we have not done that, but I'm sure the result will be changed. The accuracy will remain pretty much the same. The story is it took time to understand that. The story is that all the signal correspond to is within the sequences that already have at least one DRM. There is no signal in the sequence that have no DRM.
So even one is enough.
Even one is enough.
Okay.
Meaning that this is why I said we have all the mutations directly confirmed resistance that have been discovered before. You know, we did a similar analysis a few years ago with an African dataset, and we had the same story without machine learning. So we started again using machine learning, and we said, okay, it should be more accurate. But in fact, no.
And there is no difference in mutation frequencies depending on the genetic background, like European versus
African. When we did that for African, our hope, it's not really hope, it's bad news, but our hope was that because they are Africans, they have a different treatment, different life, etc., we should be able to discover new resistance mutation. But no.
No, the same in the UK.
Yeah, the same.
Okay.
It's a slightly different.
Yeah.
Basically.
How many DRMs there are approximately on a sequence?
It's different for UK people and African people. For African people, the average is about 5. Among the treated patients, among the one having at least 1, the average is 5. And for the UK people, I don't remember the exact number, it should be between 2 and 3. Okay. So I will move to something very different. So the second story is about the estimation of phylogenetic parameters like the R0. I'm sure everybody knows what is R0. In France, we were hearing about R0 every morning in the radios. So this is a basic reproductive number, which corresponds to the number of people that a single case can detect. Which, and you know, when this is below 1, you say, okay, so that's good because the epidemic is slowing, it's above 1, this is exponential. And this is exactly the type of parameter that we want to estimate. And again, I will start with the second message, which is more or less the opposite. I was very impressed by deep learning, in fact. I was not so optimistic at the beginning of the story, so I was very surprised and impressed. And the method that we produced and published, it is ultra fast, it is accurate, and this should become a method or an approach of choice for the surveillance of epidemics, because you can estimate these parameters in a fraction of a second. So I will say a bit more about pharmacodynamics. So I'm using Wikipedia. So pharmacodynamics is defined as the study of how epidemiological, immunological, and evolutionary processes act and potentially interact to shape viral phylogeny. This means that the story of the evolutionary story of the sequences modifies the phylogeny. And here is an example. Here you assume that you have a constant population size, and the tree that you look at here is very close to the coalescent tree. You have short branches, close to the tips, and the branches going to the path are longer and longer. And we know that the length of these branches is inversely proportional to the square of the population size. Okay, this means that when you have a constant population size, you have this type of. Oh, sorry, I'm wrong. This is proportional to the square of the number of tips in the tree. Okay, because we have 8 tips here, the time is short. The time from here to here is short, and here we have 4 tips. This is longer, and here this is longer. But this depends as well on the population size, because we have to select the tips within the population. We have selected ancestor. And when we are in this an exponential growth, we get this type of tree with very long external branches and short internal branches, because the size of the population there was much smaller than the size of the population. This is what we expect using simple arguments. Another example is here you have selection and no selection. Selection means that here we have 2 strains, and because there is selection, only one survive. And here this is again the same story, etc. Meaning that we have trees that have a shape of leader shape. And on the opposite, when we have no selection, the tree is expected to be balanced, so relatively balanced. And this is exactly what we observe with real data. For example, here we have the tree of influenza from year to year. And you see the tree is almost a perfect leader, because every year, new strain emerge from the previous year. And there is an evolutionary pressure and a fight between all the strains evolving from that one, and only one wins. And is the strain that is spread around the world the year after. And this is the same every year. And we get this correspond to. And here we have pretty much the same story with HIV. Here you have the phylogeny that corresponds to between hosts, which is between hosts, meaning that each tip corresponds to a different patient or host. And here we have sequences coming from the same host. And obviously, within the host, the selection, the fight between the strains is much harder. And then we have a tree that is not exactly a leader, but comes closer to a leader. So pharmacodynamics, this applies to fast evolving pathogens only. You cannot do pharmacodynamics for everything. And something important to understand is that the time to mutation, which is that the time between 2 mutations, it must be smaller to what is said to transmission time, but it's not exactly that. You understand why. Because here, the branch length corresponds to a number of mutations, and assume that you have no mutation between transmission. This means that you do not have a tree, you have a start tree. You have no resolution, and then you cannot do any pharmacodynamics. Meaning that you must have mutations between the transmission or distribution, etc. Most approaches are based on tree models, at least all the approaches I've been looking at. These models are similar to the models that are very common in mathematical epidemiology. One of the most common models is the compartmental model, is called susceptible infectious removed. It is very close to the burst test model I mentioned in the next slide. It has been used for, I don't know, decades. These models are defined by ordinary differential equations. This is true for the mathematical epidemiology model and for the Ferdinand model as well. And as I said, the goal is to estimate the parameter of this model. Okay. So here is the simplest model, which is the burst test model with incomplete sampling. So basically, to make it simple, we have 3 compartments and 3 rates. We have a transmission rate, meaning that we expect for the time that is exponentially distributed with parameter beta, meaning that the expected time is 1/4 beta. And when this occurs, we have a transmission, and we have another possibility is that the patient recovers before transmitting, and the rate is gamma. And we have, when the patient has recovered, there are two possibilities. It gets sampled with probability S, or unsampled with probability 1 minus S, meaning that in this case, the patient and the strain is not observed, not incomplete. R naught is equal to the ratio between beta and gamma. You see the higher beta, the more transmissions, etc. And so this model is not identifiable. This means that it's not possible to estimate all the parameters of this model. It's only possible to estimate 2 of the parameters. Most of the time, we provide S, which is the probability sampled. Sometimes it's unknown, and we prefer to provide the gamma parameter, which corresponds to the time to recover. Sometimes it's better known than the probability to be sampled. And to run this model, you start with the patient, and you expect for an exponential time, it's parameter beta, and you have a transmission event, and now you have two patients, and you continue this way, for example. And here you have a removal resampling, meaning that the phylogen stops there. And here you have a removal without sampling, meaning that this guy will never be observed. And you continue again, and for example, the epidemic stop with these 4 strains for patients. And here you have the complete tree, but you do not observe the complete tree, you observe the sampled tree, meaning that this part of the tree will never be observed. Okay? And meaning that this corresponds to the input of your, this is your input. You have to estimate the parameters from that tree.
Yeah. So why the R0 is inversely proportional to gamma? I mean, if the patient is not recovered, or if no patient will be recovered, then R0 will go to infinity. But why this is the case? I mean, if gamma goes to 0, then R0 will go to infinity.
But first, it's not mathematics. This is not a definition. This is something that we can calculate from the math.
Okay. So R0 does not.
But this makes sense. This makes sense because this is a competition between beta and gamma in some sense. Beta corresponds to the number of transmissions, the times between 2 transmissions, right? And gamma corresponds to the time to recover. And if we recover very quickly, then we don't transmit. Meaning that the time to recover is very important. It's a short time.
Right.
But sorry, I want to say something. That the time is inversely proportional to the parameter. Speaking here, I'm speaking of rate, but the time is the inverse of the rate.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Okay, possibly this was your question. Okay, meaning that if gamma is large, the time to recover is low.
Yes.
Okay. So a more complex model, which is birthdays with exposed class. It's pretty much the same as before, but we have one more compartment, meaning that when someone is infected, he is said to be exposed, but there is a period before it becomes infectious. And you remember that with SARS-CoV-2, this was said to be 5 days, 7 days, something like that. Okay, so one more rate, which is becoming infectious rate. Another model, which corresponds to what we call super spreaders, meaning that in the population we have two types of individuals, the normal individuals and the ones that transmit a lot. And this is a common assumption, for example, with HIV. We know that HIVs are super spreaders, but that's also been shown with Ebola and the dead body, for example, were super spreaders at some point. In Guinea, Africa, and with SARS-CoV-2, some people demonstrated or assumed that they could be super spreaders. And the model is pretty much the same as a birth-death model, except that you can jump from that part corresponding to the super spreaders to that part corresponding to the normal spreaders. Okay, meaning that we have two models and it's possible to jump from one to another. And we still have the parameter R0, which is equal to the sum of the two beta parameters divided by gamma. We are interested in the fraction of super spreaders, how many super spreaders we have in the population, and about the super spreading ratio, meaning they spread, they transmit twice more, 10 times more, 100 times more. This is this ratio. Okay? So now we would like to insert the parameters of this model. And the gold standard in general is likelihood, maximum likelihood, or Bayesian methods, as implemented in these two, for example. But to do that, you need to be able to compute the likelihood of the tree. And in this very simple model, in the birth-death model, we have this very nice formula from Tanya Stadler. In fact, it's possible to compute the likelihood of the tree. But you have to understand this is not so easy because part of the tree has not been seen. And when we compute the likelihood of the tree, we account for everything that we do not observe in the tree. Meaning that we assume that, for example, on that branch, there was a transmission, and that transmission has not been observed because the guy has not been sampled. And when we compute that likelihood, we incorporate everything that has not been said in the tree. And because we have to do that, he explains that we have no closed form solution, no nice formula like this one. For the complex model, for example, for BDEI and BDSS, we do not have a nice equation like this one. And we have systems of ordinary differential equations. We have 5 to 10 differential equations per branch, and with some recursion. And to solve this big system of numerical equations, differential equation is very complex. It's time-consuming with imprecision, and it turns out that programs often they don't converge. I will show that. And this cannot be used with large trees. It's just impossible with more than 5 tips. But you know, for example, with SARS-CoV-2, now we have 12 million genomes. There is such a gap between these two numbers. Okay. So another standard approach, which has become standard, is approximate Bayesian computation. So we have the real tree. The tree is encoded using summary statistics. I will give a few examples. And then we do that. We simulate trees that are a priori close to the real tree. And then typically we simulate 10,000 trees. Then we select the 100 closest trees. Obviously, this number is can be changed. It's important value. And then you can average of the parameters within this neighborhood. But it's better to do some adjustment, typically linear adjustment, and you can use the lasso, for example, which works well, and you estimate the parameters this way. But there is no need to compute the likelihood. This is relatively fast. When I say relatively, this is in between because we have to simulate trees that resemble your input trees. And this is typically to simulate 10,000 trees. And this is fairly accurate for the experiments that we have done. But this is highly dependent on the metric that you use here. Here, for example, you can use the Euclidean distance to compute the neighborhood. This is very arbitrary. And this also depends on summary statistics. And when in our experiments, when we change the model, we have to invent new summary statistics, which is fun in some sense. Say, okay, it should be like this and that, and then we make the test and see if it works. And we do it again. But each new model requires new summary statistics.
Okay, again?
Yeah.
Would you mind please here, what is the target again? What do you want to estimate?
What we want to estimate is typically
again, the parameters. The parameters.
The parameters. You assume that the tree follows a given model, and you want to estimate the parameters.
And how many they are? All of them now, or?
Well, for example, with the burst test, we have only 2 parameters.
Okay, only 2 parameters. Okay.
With BDSS, we have 4 parameters.
Do they interact between themselves? I mean, if one goes up, the other can go down, or something like that.
R0 is equal to beta divided by gamma. So yeah, they are not related.
They can be correlated, right?
Yeah, they are correct, for sure.
Just to follow up on that question, how do you manage to simulate trees that look like a real tree?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the most obvious answer is you simulate trees of the same size, having the same number of trees.
And then you just hope that you will do like within those 10,000 trees that you simulate, there will be some trees that are close enough to the real tree.
This is the hope.
As a summary,
we have done much more sophisticated simulation, where it's possible to simulate trees having the same sampling schedule. You know, because in your tree, you know that I have 2 sequences that have the trees that they etc. Then we managed to have a simulator that's able to simulate trees respecting exactly the schedule.
Okay, so you're kind of injecting some additional knowledge to make those simulations being more targeted and having like a higher probability to get
if you simulate a tree that is very high, observed trees doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You have to in some sense you have to manage to treat that.
So something like kind of playing around with the proposal mechanism for MCMC, right? To kind of tune those simulations to be in a way sufficiently efficient.
We have not done that in a Bayesian way.
No, it's kind of like, I'm just saying it's like similar to designing a proposal mechanism, like a lot of tuning and trying.
Inflexible, right? Because at the very beginning, they call this type of approximate Bayesian computation because they did exactly that. Tuning the parameters so that the summary statistics get closer. But this is no more used. People don't use it. Okay, to say just a few words about the summary statistics, the branch length, for example, the edge length, the distribution of branch length, distribution of internal edge length, the tree imbalance, linear MTT plots that correspond to the number of sequences to time, etc. So we have used this kind of summary statistics, and you will see that it works. But we have in mind to do something different. So first, having a very large set of simulated trees, that is millions of trees. These trees do not have the same size, and they correspond to a large parameter range. But this is why basically we need millions to make sure that some trees are close to. And then having a complete encoding of the tree, because deep learning methods are not able to input trees, they input vectors. Meaning that we have to encode the tree into a vector, and then the neural network is trained, this is input, and trained to predict the parameter values. And when we have the real tree, we use the same encoding and we output the predicted values. Okay. So the good point is that the inference is immediate, so it's less than 1 second, even for large tree. Likely free, rejection free, the independent of the model, because we do not use summary statistics. And obviously the question is, how do you encode a tree? How do you transform a tree into a vector? So we tested several solutions, and for months, and was used to say to the guys working on that, say, okay, you see, artificial intelligence is not so smart, so be more confident in natural intelligence and use the summary statistics. But at one point, we moved to a different idea, which works very well, which is the following. Here we have a tree, which corresponds to the original tree. And the first step is to ladderize the tree, okay, which is a form of standardization. And to do that, we swap the internal nodes, internal edges, so that the deepest part is always on the left. Meaning that here, for example, the deepest one here, now it is on left. And and that one, for example, is deeper than this one. It is before this one, which is the last one. Okay, this is something very standard for objectives. And we were influenced in that by influenza because the layer shape of the tree had in mind that lateralizing the tree should help in standardizing the trees and help the machinery to learn something from the tree. And the second step is the following, which is what is called an in-order tree traversal. It means that you start from the top and you visit the tree, and the first node or tip to be visited is that one. And then you measure the distance from the tip to the root, which is equal to 6. And then the second one is capital D, the distance to the root is 2. Then the next one is small d, the distance to the root is 3. And you perform this tree traversal, and you obtain this series of numbers corresponding to the distance between the nodes or the tips and the roots. Okay? And then we rearrange that into a matrix, rows, corresponding to tips and to internal nodes. And we decided for a maximum tree size, which was 500 experiment, and we complete all of this with zeros. And this is our encoding of trees. So it's pretty obvious, if you think a bit about that it's possible to reconstruct the tree from the encoding, meaning that if you have this encoding, it's possible to reconstruct that tree. Simply you make vertical bar of length 6, then you insert an internal node at a distance 2 from the root, and you continue this way. This is a very simple algorithm that takes this encoding and reconstructs the original tree. And in some sense, this is as compact as possible, because here we have 2n-1 entries in the vector, but the number of branch lengths in the tree is 2n-2. Meaning that with a single additional value, we are able, in some sense, to encode the tree topology as well. So we have no proof of that, no mathematical proof, but I am very confident. It's likely very difficult to do better. And why is this important to be compact and non-redundant and bijective? This is to avoid that the machinery first learn that two trees, in fact, they are very different in terms of representation, but they are the same. And this waste the time of the machinery in some sense. And when we tried more complex representation, not having these properties of non-redundancy and bijectivity, it didn't work because the machinery was lost, just ignoring that two different representations they are actually equivalent. Is clear enough?
Could you explain the zeros? How many do you put there? So this matrix has two rows, right? The matrix representation will have one row for the tips and one for the internal nodes.
Yeah, and here we have a zero here because it's correct.
Yeah, because it's a row.
And these zeros, this is because we decided that we have to learn from trees with 500 tips.
Oh, okay.
Some of our trees were much smaller. And to have a standardized input for the deep learners.
You have bigger or smaller trees in the same data set. Yeah. Okay.
So just to clarify, the one tree is like two vectors. One with the tips and one with the
I know. Writing the slides, okay. We have called this vectorial. This is a matrix. But first, it was a vector. At some point, we decided to make.
So the important step here is the standardization, actually, because you put the tree in an order. In fact, right? The previous step is the important because otherwise
step is
incomparable.
We checked the importance of that step, meaning that we replace the linearization by random ordering.
Okay.
It still works, but not as well. Needing more training samples. There is a gap between the two representations using linearization and random ordering. And we tested other ordering, but no one was better than this one.
Independent of the way the virus evolves.
Yeah. So the intuition based on influenza in some sense is just an intuition. We had the feeling that it should be important to have the tree in the ladder shape, but we have no formal proof.
Because SARS is different than influenza, and the same is HIV. So would that apply for?
We laderize the tree as well. Because it is a standardization of the input tree.
So every time you want to, this is influenza specific?
No, not at all. This is just to explain where the intuition comes from.
Okay.
We tried other solutions, that one.
This is the simplest, I guess.
It's very simple, and no one was better. So we get that. Okay. So possibly I will click on that. I'm sure I'm late. So we have this representation of trees using summary statistics or vectorial representation. For the summary statistic, we use a very standard architecture, which is a multi-layer perceptron, the most standard architecture, deep learning machinery. And for the other one, where the representation is a low level, we have raw data. If you try yourself to analyze this data, this is extremely combinatorial. So where is the information, etc. So we have the feeling that we should perform some kind of picture extraction. And for that, we use the convolutional neural network. And again, I cannot tell you why exactly, but this one was the one performing the best. So we tried many architecture, number of hidden layers, type of hidden layers, etc. And this architecture was the best.
In the CNN, okay, you have the 2x3 matrix in the first layer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we search for patterns using a convolutional layer. And then apparently we found patterns. I cannot tell you. And because we find patterns where we have been able to do the prediction. Okay. So the results, we simulated data. First, we simulated data using the birth-based model. And for that model, we are able to compute the likelihood, meaning that beasts or maximal relative approach implemented in 3PAR, they are in principle they are optimal. And here this corresponds to the three different methods. These two summary statistics using a feed-forward neural network and vectorial representation using a convolutional neural network. And you see that the accuracy is pretty much the same. Okay? And there is no significant difference between any of these methods. And the time of inference, we are faster than beasts, but it's not a big deal because all the methods are faster. Now with birthdays, with super spreaders, this is very different. The number of test sets was 100, but 21 were problematic for beasts, meaning that for, I don't remember the number, 10, about 10, we had no convergence. So we waited for days, and even after days, we had no convergence of efficiency. And we can add local optima as well. Sometimes we converge onto local optima. And meaning that the methods were only comparable on 80% of the data sets. To make it short, on this 80%, the accuracy is similar among neural networks and these two. Meaning that in practice, this makes a big difference because 80% is not 100%. And when this converges to local optima, you are not informed. You know when this does not converge, when this converges to local optima, you can believe that this corresponds to the good estimate, which is not the case. And you see here the difference in terms of accuracy. For example, for the last parameter, the average accuracy of beast is 0.43. This is the relative error. The error is 40%, say. It's much lower with the neural networks. This is the same here. So there is clearly a gap in terms of accuracy. And the computing time, the difference is incredible because in one case this is less than 1 second, and with beast this is more than almost 3 days. No, more than 3 days. Computation. Okay. And for me, the surprise was that this vectorial representation with convolutional neural network has pretty much the same accuracy than the summary statistics that we extracted for a long time.
Olivier, in BEAST2, you provide the tree and you estimate the parameters, or you estimate the tree as well?
No, in that experiment, we provided the tree.
Provided, okay.
Yeah, the tree was correct.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of model selection, because here I only explained the estimation of the parameters with a kind of regression, it's also possible to perform model selection. This means that in your training set, you have trees generated by birthdays, PDEI, and PDSS. And then the goal is to be able to predict the and the accuracy of the neural network is about 90%. Which is good, in fact, because, for example, when depending on the value of the parameters, this type of model can be very close to that one. Okay, if 1 over epsilon is close to 0, this means that these two models become equivalent. Now, speaking of beasts, we again had the same problem of non-convergence. And this occurred 24 trees among 24% of them. But when it converges, the accuracy of the vectors. Okay. So as I said, I was surprised by the accuracy that we obtained with the vectorial representation, because this is very combinatorial and it's very difficult to say where the information is buried in the encoding. We apply this method to a data set of men and sex in men, HIV data set from Zurich, and I will not go into the details, but the estimates were very convincing and in agreement with other studies. In the paper, we explained that the method can be applied to very large trees with dozens of thousand tips. And we do that by decomposing the trees into sub-epidemics, non-overlapping sub-epidemics. We perform estimation for the parameter of each sub-epidemics. And then we average the estimates, which works very well. And because the method is so fast, even for 10,000 tips, I don't remember, copying time is about 1 minute. This could become a method of choice for the surveillance of epidemics. Okay. So now a few words about going back to the initial purpose. Machine learning for phylogenetics, which is trendy this time. I discussed this with Alexis. He gave me other example, but this would be helpful for many subtasks which are time-consuming, like model selection, estimating the rate of evolution of every sign in the multiple sequence alignment, estimating evolutionary distances, which is time-consuming with proteins, and other examples given by Alexis. But I'm pretty sure that it will never be used to infer trees, because we have very good algorithms, and it's a very different question. And for me, the most exciting part is that this is an alternative to mathematical modeling. Because if you have this mathematical model with ordinary differential equations, you basically have two sources. You can simulate the data and you use deep learning, for example, any kind of learning approach to learn something from the simulation. It's difficult for the computer, but very easy for you. Or you have to spend time solving these differential equations. If you are able to do that, it works well. But every new model requires a big investment in terms of mathematical analysis, etc. And possibly the model is not so interesting that we spend years to solve differential equations. So for many tasks in phylogenetics and other domains, deep learning or machine learning can be used to simplify this mathematical analysis and modeling. And I'm looking for postdoc to work on these kind of questions. And last but not least, thank you. I have difficulties to say that in English. People try to explain to me the subletters. So subletters are very difficult. And to my co-authors, Luc, Anna, and Jakub, and all of you for listening for your questions.
So, again, you should go close to the microphone. Thank you very much, Olivier, for this very nice and interesting talk. I know there are hopefully still some Zoom participants taking part in this meeting. So, if you're on Zoom and want to ask a question, please just unmute yourself and maybe state your name and affiliation, and go right ahead and ask a question. So wait a little bit, if that is the case, if we can hear you. Okay, well then maybe then I'll ask one more question regarding the prediction of the pandemic parameters. To which extent is the prediction by machine learning kind of sensitive to getting the tree right or wrong? Did you test this? Because for us at least, especially for the very large trees, there's a high degree of uncertainty in which is the correct tree. So typically you have like a set of possible trees for the evolution of the same viral sequences. So is there some sort of sensitivity in the prediction, or could you just average overall the prediction over all more or less equally likely trees?
We have not done so many experiments in that line because it's extremely time consuming. We did that with Emma Saulnier 6 years ago. And when the tree is not correct, when it is inferred from sequences, you have a loss in terms of accuracy for sure. But this is not that much a question of topology, it's more the question of branch length, because the branch lengths are more informative than the tree topology. And yeah, so this is a good question that very few people discuss in the papers. Yeah, what you suggested at the end that we cannot, this is something that we have done. You know that the tree could be not correct, meaning that we check that we're using alternative trees, you get pretty much the same parameter value. This is something that we have done. This works well. Yeah. And for example, another issue which is very problematic for standard Farley dynamic models, which is that the trees are not always fully resolved. And all the equations there assume that the tree is fully resolved. And then we try to have some kind of random resolution of the nodes, and we check that the parameter values are independent from. But when I entered the domain, 5 years ago, I said to them, okay, take care. I am inferring trees. I can tell you they are not that good, so take care about what you infer. And I know it's the question. For analysts, I do not have a complete answer, but we see something that we have done a long time ago was phylogeny. And we did phylogeny of HIV in Africa, and we were estimating the flow of sequences from one country to another. And we had 4,000 sequences, meaning that we were sure that the tree was not correct. But based on the flow, we were able to reconstruct the map of Africa. So I was very impressed by that because I was sure that the tree was not fully correct. Just looking at the flow, it's okay, there's a big flow between 2 countries, and this big flow always corresponded to common border. So in that case, yes, again, the tree topology is important, but if there are some small problems, it's still okay.
Are there, so the people on Zoom, just unmute yourself and start shouting. Are there any questions in the room still?
Yeah, so regarding the topology that you said is not important, if it is like a ladder, is it important? So the topology plays a role in the estimation of these parameters, right?
So what I'm saying is that in the summary statistics, we have many summary statistics about tree imbalance, like the Corres index and kind of things. And we made a comparison between that and between summary statistics based on branch length or on the entity plot. And those are much more informative than the imbalance.
But are these independent statistics totally? Maybe the information part they are based on relevant information, both of them, or the information that they take from
provide some information.
It's not.
But when you run the summary statistics, the tree topology is certainly not first.
Okay. Okay, and so what we have seen in ABC is that if you try to estimate parameters that are correlated, or that, better to say, when you can get the final data by simultaneously changing the parameters that you want to estimate, for example, to make one smaller and the other bigger, or the first bigger and the other smaller, and you take the same result eventually, then it's very difficult to estimate both of them simultaneously.
Yes, obviously, but they are not fully correct.
So this is your case as well, right?
No,
Or
there
not?
is a correlation, but this is not a full
It's not so
correlation.
strong. It's not so strong.
Meaning that it's more difficult to estimate a pair of parameters that are correlated, but here the correlation is there.
Okay. And is it possible to estimate R0 over time? So if you have the tree, to estimate an R0, let's say in the root of the tree, and then as you go down to more present day data, to estimate R0 again and to see if this has changed?
Yes. For example, with the big trees, when we decompose the big trees into sub-epidemics, it's possible to say, okay, this was the start of the story. We will estimate the first R0 corresponding to the root region, and then other R0 values corresponding to the shadow part of the tree.
Okay.
Shadow part.
And the last question, related to the question of Alexis about simulations. Have you tried GANs, like generative adversary networks, to simulate data? Because they should give eventually simulations that look very close to the real data.
Which one?
Generative adversary networks. It's like.
No.
But this is more for the ABC part of the experiment.
Yes.
Yes. These are people that do that.
Yes.
Actually, they simulate a few trees, a few hundred of trees. Then they make a first estimation of the parameters and then adjust the estimation.
Yeah. Okay.
There are methods to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe other questions? I still have a question. Anybody else have a question? No. So I have a question. If I didn't miss anything, you kind of trained your neural network using simulations only.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you, as far as I understood, you just had this kind of one example with validated data, this data set from Switzerland, I think, where you could show that in that case, it actually your neural network prediction worked on real data. I mean, this is a general tendency, and sometimes there's nothing else you can do, but how dangerous do you think it is to kind of train those neural networks just using, because we have few, or we even don't have any ground truth, like real double-check ground truth data set for real data. How dangerous do you think it is to work with that?
Well, this is very different from analytic inference, because here we have a model. If we are able to compute the likelihood, we would have a perfect estimator, assuming that the model is correct. Meaning that when we simulate within the model, this makes sense again. Because we simulate within the model, and when I say R0 is equal to this means assuming this model, then R0 is estimated to that value. So this is very different from estimating a rate matrix, for example. In that case, for sure, you need a real data.
So you're assuming, of course, under the assumption that the model is correct or realistic.
Yeah. The machine learning is only used to avoid what we are unable to do, which is computing the likelihood of the tree.
Are there any further questions? Also not from the internet. So if you want to join us, we're going for lunch after this talk, so you can ask Olivier more questions. So thank you once again, Olivier, also for coming here and for the nice presentation. If you want to meet with Olivier and have an additional chat, he will be here this afternoon, but eventually also tomorrow. So just kind of drop me an email if you want to meet with Olivier and have some more time to talk. Thank you very much.
Venga, un